This Choircast podcast is brought to you by Winter Moon and Coffee Stain, poems and lyrics by Keith Giles. In this collection, author and poet Keith Giles has gathered some of his best poems and song lyrics into one volume. Written between 1980 and 2024, these poems span a variety of subjects ranging from love and loss to grief and restoration, and everything learned along the way. Winter Moon and Coffee Stain available now on Amazon.
Welcome everyone to another episode of I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist. Troy, I'm going to throw to you, but we often reference Megan and Bart on Bart Ehrman's podcast, having chit-chat before, but I don't know if you've been listening to the last few, but they've purposely stopped doing it.
Oh, have they? I wonder if people have sort of given them feedback. I'd love to say, because they heard us, but I know that they haven't. But wouldn't it be good if they did? But yeah, that's interesting. Very interesting. But you're listening again, are you? I thought you stopped listening.
Yeah, no, I listened to the last 2 weeks. I picked it up and just thought, I'll just see what they're up to. And one of them was because they had like a Q&A for a 2-year celebration of the pod. I thought, I'll just see what that is. But they actually mentioned it in it. And I think Megan said something about, now, I know we don't do the check-in anymore, and wanted to...
So it wasn't just us that was going, guys, you're going on too long. You're going on too long.
No, I believe it was just us. They heard us and they went, we are going to take the wise advice of Brian and Troy.
Well, interestingly enough, I had one of my questions read out on the show, but they didn't name me, right? They just sort of said, here's the question. And I know it was my question because I sent that fucking question in. And funny enough, Brian, it was a question about the verses where Jesus said, some standing here will not taste death. And he actually did respond to my question. So I'm a fanboy of Bart Ehrman. You know I am. And, having my question read out, it was actually kind of cool, even though I've got my own freaking podcast.
I reckon it is pretty cool because I can't remember. They were reeling off all these stats before the latest episode of how many downloads and that they get and how many YouTube views they get. And it was just really interesting. I mean, obviously, he's riding off the back of his literary fame and also his academic fame, but he was talking about just the reach that podcasting and YouTubing had, and it was just mind-blowing, some of the numbers. I'm not going to make them up because they're there. But we do talk about Bart Ehrman today and your question being read out, and particularly around that theme, because as our listeners would have heard 2 weeks ago, we aired a repeat of our conversation with Bart Ehrman, and we're going to leverage that today. So we purposely dropped it so we could leverage it in today's episode.
Yes, we purposely dropped it. That's right. We weren't behind at all on our recordings and editings or anything. Not at all. We intentionally did that. And we did because this episode today is all about the return of Christ. And we did an episode on the return of Christ back when we very first started. And it was like half hour. There were dogs moving around and all that kind of stuff. And I'll throw a link into the show notes. But I just thought it was a really good time to come back and revisit this point. And another thing for me, Brian, and why I really wanted to do this episode is because this for me, and I didn't mention this in our episode where I told my story about actually losing my faith. And I don't know why I didn't mention it, but it is true. This for me was the final straw that broke the camel's back, the final nail in the coffin. Every rose has its thorn. No, that one doesn't work. But for me, it was like when I really was, breaking down all the faith, all the reasons why I shouldn't believe, I was still holding on. And when I actually looked at the return of Jesus thing, I went, okay, this religion isn't true anymore. And that I had my fridge revelation when I was walking out of Country Town AOG, almost said the name then, almost said Geelong, whoops. And I, even as a Christian, used to say, hold on, didn't you say soon?
We've got a fridge magnet speaking of fridge revelations, which is a picture of Jesus saying, Jesus is coming, quick, look busy. So we do joke a little bit about Jesus' return, but it was one of those things for me, it was really strange, actually. I was so deep into it because I think that was, I looked at so many other things going, virgin birth, resurrection, whatever. But he's going to come back. He's going to come back, and it probably will be in my lifetime, just complete cognitive dissonance. But I did hold on to that and sort of had it reinforced, even though the Left Behind series with Tim LaHaye and the other bloke who I can't remember his name off the top of my head, even though it was fiction, it was poorly written, it was reinforcing in some sort of way. And I didn't buy into the pre, post, mid-trib sort of stuff. I was just like, I don't know, whatever. He's just going to come back.
You weren't a preterist?
No, I wasn't.
You went post-trib, pre-trib, mid-trib?
I flipped around with whenever there was a good argument. I went, oh, yeah, that sounds good. But in the end, I was like, I don't really care. As long as he comes back. I would rather he comes back pre, so I don't have to go through some shit. But if I've got to go through shit, it doesn't matter because, I'm going to be up there with him. So for me, it was one of the last things, I guess, to go as well. Not completely last, but it was in the death throes, I think, because I was just like, well, I have to hold on to this because this is one reason I'm a Christian. It's not just about being a Christian for the sake of it and behavioural stuff and social justice and all that sort of stuff. There has to be, there has to be an end point, and maybe that's it.
And the end times was really cool when we were young, to sit around and talk about, this is what's, because you even said you were right into, unexplained mysteries and Nostradamus and all that. So to have this book that we actually believed was predicting the end of the world and, probably almost definitely within our lifetime, it was really cool to go to those meetings or to sit around at, after Bible studies and talking about the end times. And so I think because we were wide open to it, psychologically and emotionally, I think it was really quite deep within us. So I'm not surprised that it was something that was, sort of the last to go for some of us. But for me, it wasn't so much about being the last to go. It was when I realized that it wasn't coming, it was such an important part of my faith that I actually went, oh, okay. And, this religion isn't true. And it also, for me, disproved the Bible being not just perfect, but even authoritative.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things for me that gave hope in just shitty times. It's just like, this being a Christian thing, it's not all it's cracked up to be. But hey, got to play
Except
to
when
the
the
end.
DC Talk albums came out, then it was a good time to be a Christian.
It was, and Whiteheart albums. I was big into Whiteheart too. But yeah, I think that was the thing. It was the clutching onto that hope, and I think that's what I used it for. And when that went, and I think it was similar to you, it's just like, well, what's the fucking point? It's all a crock of shit anyway. So it was a weird thing to cling on to when I look back, because I'm like, well, that's just one of the easiest things to go, this is a crock of shit because it hasn't happened. And they said it had happened a couple of thousand years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of Whiteheart, that's pretty fucking 80s to be into Whiteheart, by the way. That's pretty cool. I was Petra, 80s and 90s Petra, yeah.
Petra was, I think that was the first CD I bought, Petra on Fire, the one with the sword on the front. And I bought it from I can't remember what denomination it was. It was that Christian bookshop on Station Street in Box Hill. You would know it.
That was a Lutheran one, I think. It was some sort of denominational mainstream Uniting Church Lutheran, something like that, yeah.
It totally was, because
The Open Book, it was called.
The Open Book, that's it, yeah, because they had CDs and everything, but they also had communion sets right next to the CDs, all that sort of stuff, so it was quite traditionalist.
Yeah, and they didn't have Kenneth Copeland and Hagen books.
No.
Couldn't go there for bullshit. Well, you could, but a different kind of bullshit. So, hey, let's get into this, right? This whole idea of, did Jesus actually predict that he was going to come back? But more than that, does the Bible predict that that Jesus was going to come back in the lifetime of the writers? And so I've got this article which I read, Brian, back in, 2003, 2004. Yeah, about then, maybe even 2005. And it's called The Lowdown on God's Showdown. The Lowdown on God's Showdown. It's written by a guy called Edward Babinski, who wrote a couple of books about people leaving faith and other stuff. And he's worth looking up. And I actually reached out to him about this article back in the day because he published on infidels.org. So all these links, I'm going to throw all these in the show notes. But he light years ahead of us, like he probably did this. As a matter of fact, I know he wrote this in 2001. So this article is coming up to 25 years old. But the arguments that he makes were being made by people in the 1900s, in the 1800s, and dare I say, possibly even 3rd, 4th, 5th century, like this is not anything new. To quote the writer of, Ecclesiastes, nothing new under the sun. So people have worked this stuff out long before we did. And I'm making the point that I probably read this 3, 4, 5 years after he wrote it, but that to me seemed like a lifetime before, to having looked at that back then and actually come to a point of losing my faith.
Yeah, it's and look, it's a dense article. So the way we're going to work through it is Troy is going to read some stuff out, which we'll talk about conversations. Which, dare we say, we're going to read out some scriptures because we have to do that because that's what they're leaning on.
Yeah, trigger alert.
Definitely. For myself too, but I think we've got to do that to contextualize the conversation and also go, what the fuck? Because it is lots of what the fuck moments when I think about this stuff. And I don't know, of the many things I'm embarrassed about having been a Christian that I believe so blindly, this is definitely one of them. The Sky Fairy is going to come back.
The Sky Fairy. The Sky Fairy. So are you saying that Jesus was what?
A Sky Fairy.
He's a Sky Fairy. Okay. Well, he wasn't married. Are you denigrating his sexuality here, Brian, or is this a metaphor?
This isn't about sexuality. This is just about mythical beasts, and fairies are mythical, as is Jesus. He was real. He was a real person, but his deity was not.
That's right. Sky Fairy and his Sky Daddy.
Yes, that's right. And his Sky Ghost.
Sky Fairy and his Sugar Daddy. I hear. Okay, well, look, let's start with, first of all, hopefully our listeners are far enough along the journey, and if you're not, that's okay as well. But hopefully most of us are far enough along the journey to know that when we read the scripture, we should try to read it in terms of what it was meant at the time that it was written. Because I think what we used to do, Brian, is we used to read these verses because we were told Jesus is coming soon, and we were told that this book is holy, this book is, God speaks to you through this book. That I think we oftentimes, and I'm not saying this is true of everyone, but I know it was true of me, that we oftentimes read this book as if God had written it 15 minutes ago, at best, maybe, 30 years ago, and it's speaking to us now and it's written for us now. But that's actually not the case.
Well, I think they had to present it that way because otherwise it would become deeply irrelevant if you're saying, oh, this was written for an audience, 12, 15, 2,000 years ago, whatever. I think the only way to bring it relevant is the whole infallibility of the Bible. Everything is about recency. It doesn't matter when it was written. Because otherwise you could just look back on any historical book and go, hey, this is as true today as it was back then. So they had to do something. It was a great marketing exercise, I think.
Yeah, well, people tend to do that with Shakespeare to a degree, don't they? They tend to draw sort of wisdom, a rose is still a rose by any other name, those kinds of things. People do draw that out. But, obviously Shakespeare didn't rise from the dead. Or people didn't claim that he rose from the dead. So that's what makes this book somewhat different as well. But anyway, look, I just want to make that point because what happens is when you read it as if it's written for today and not written for them back then, well, then obviously that changes the meaning of the text. But also sometimes when you dismiss the fact that Jesus didn't return within their lifetime, the verses that were actually written to them stop making sense, to quote Talking Heads.
I would hope that you're going to take it there, because I was going to as well.
Yeah. I saw you going to. So, okay, let's start right now. Those of you that listened to Bart Ehrman's episode, the repeat episode last week, would understand that he wrote this book on Revelation, and he talks a lot about Revelation. But we'll do a little bit of digging into Revelation, but not a whole heap, right? Because Bart has sort of gone there, and we're on a first name basis with him. So, the book of Revelation, which is the final book in the New Testament, says this: the revelation which God gave to show the things that must shortly take place. And that's in Revelation 1:1. All right. So it says shortly take place. And you can go and look up your Greek words and all that kind of stuff, but that's basically what it says. And then when we get into the fact that this was actually written to several churches in Asia Minor around 65 to 95 AD, depending on when you think this book was written, it says this: he, speaking of Jesus, is coming with the clouds, and every eye shall see him, even those who pierced him. Repent, therefore, or else I am coming to you. And at that stage, he's talking to the church at Pergamum. Quickly, he says. There it is again, quickly. And I will make war against them with the sword of my mouth. And this, at that point, he's speaking to the church at, how do you say that one?
Thyatira.
Thyatira, yeah. Hold fast until I come, because, and then he's speaking to the church of Philadelphia, where he says, you have kept the word of my perseverance, and I will keep you from the hour of testing, which is about to come upon the whole world. And about to come, there's a Greek word there, mello, right, which doesn't mean coming down of something. Mello, which means about to come, right? Like on the verge of. That's actually what that Greek word means.
Pre-cum.
Yeah, perhaps that sort of clear, sticky liquid. Upon the whole world, I am coming quickly. Hold fast what you, Church of Philadelphia, hold fast what you have. So if we turn around and say, now this is written for today and not written for them back then when they got this letter, it made no sense.
Well, it has to be written for today, doesn't it, if you're a fundamentalist?
For sure. But you can't have it both ways.
You can.
Is the point? Well, you can. I knew you were going to say that. I knew you were going to say that. I could see it in your face. Yes, you can. But in the terms of this article, you can't have it both ways, right? So it's either for them that he's coming quickly, or it's for modern day that he's about to come. It's either, it can't be both. And I just want to show, that the logic is there. Anyway, the last chapter of Revelation. Oh, sorry, did you want to say something?
I was going to say, but do you remember the old arguments around transcending time? Not just a day isn't 1,000 years, 1,000 years is a day, whatever, but that, God transcended time, and that we were bound by time. God wasn't bound by time. So he could be coming back then or now.
Sure. And I used to think about that as a Christian, right? And think to myself, that makes zero sense to a group of people that are bound by time, meaning human. Okay? So it's like me talking to a bunch of ants about Einstein's theory of relativity, right? They're just not going to get it. And so you don't. So if God is saying to a bunch of humans, or, Jesus is saying to a bunch of humans, lo, I'm coming quickly, if Jesus is saying this, then if he didn't mean it, then he shouldn't have said it. And I just don't believe that argument actually philosophically holds weight, because when God says to a human, I'm coming quickly, he's speaking to them in their language. He's speaking to them in what they understand. And if he didn't mean I'm coming quickly, then he should have said, oh, by the way, hang about, I'm going to be a moment.
You're putting a philosophical overlay over it. Don't go there. I mean, we're talking about truth here, and
and I know what you're doing. You're playing the devil's advocate. I hear you, but let's come back. Right? He's speaking to a group of people, and he says, "I am going to keep you from the hour of testing, which is about to come." And there's that word "mellow" again. Right? I feel like we're at Great Big AOG saying the word "come" as much as we are, but he said he's going to keep them from the hour of testing. Now he didn't. They all died. The hour of testing hasn't happened yet. right? I mean, I guess you could argue and say, well, he meant they were going to die. So why say I'm coming quickly? No, there's no way around this. They believed they were in the last days.
And this is where, again, there'll be contradictions in the way it's explained, because it'll be, well, he didn't mean that literally. Like, you're taking, God's wisdom surpasses your wisdom. And this is why you don't understand it. And you would hear that all the time. The amount of times that I actually got that whacked in my face was, but you just don't understand. When they didn't have a way to explain it, where they didn't have any logic to something, well, God's wisdom surpasses our wisdom, and there are things that are unexplained, and they'll only be explained when we're reunited with him. It was that old fucking tripe, which only lasts for so long, because you eventually go, you've got no fucking answers.
Yeah, that's right. And basically what they're doing is they're telling you, stop reasoning, stop looking at this, just trust me. And quite possibly they'd gone through that themselves, and that's what they'd heard when they had asked these questions too. That's just, yep, exactly right. Anyway, let's keep going. So looking at the book of James, right? And in the book of James, chapter 5, it says, come now, you rich, those living in the time when the letter was written. Okay, so remember, this is speaking to the people to whom the letter was written. Okay, weep and howl for your miseries, which are coming upon you. It is in the last days that you have stored up your treasure. Be patient, therefore, brethren, until the coming of the Lord. Behold, the farmer waits for the precious produce of the soil, being patient about it until it gets until it gets the early and late rains. You too be patient. Strengthen your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Behold, the judge is standing right at the door. Now, if that didn't happen, those verses don't make sense. And if those verses don't make sense, then I would challenge that the Bible is not true. And I think that's another reason why they have to be very adamant and very strong about the return of Christ and do that mental gymnastics, which you just said, because otherwise this is proof that it's crock shit.
Well, yes, and we know it is. But there's so many scriptures that back it up. That's the thing. And I'm not saying they actually do back it up, but there is a swathe of them, and it just causes an incredible amount of confusion, particularly if you don't have the ability to unpack it. And again, going back, when you try and unpack it, it's just like, hey, your wisdom is just worldly wisdom and you don't get it. So it's just shit.
Yeah. So they just basically get you to stop trusting yourself. Okay. The letter to the Hebrews says, in these last days, he, meaning Jesus, would have needed to suffer often since the foundation of the world. But now, once at the consummation being the end, right? He has manifested to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself, as you, speaking to the first century Christians here, as you see the day drawing near. So they could see it, okay? For yet a very little while, he who is coming will come and will not delay. And for me, this was fridge revelation, Brian. I'm sitting there, cleaning the fridge going, hold on, you said you were coming soon, and that was 2,000 years ago. Either God speaks intentionally to deceive, or soon doesn't mean soon, or quickly doesn't mean quickly, or the Greek word mellow doesn't mean mellow. This makes absolutely no sense.
It doesn't. You are correct. From the point that we are standing now, and I know we're overlaying logic and all that sort of stuff, but let's not downplay the power of that closed system that we were all caught up in, all of our listeners undoubtedly were caught up in, where you weren't allowed to let external logic in and objectivity. Everything was subjective, and it was based on the fact that you believed in this infallible word of God, which was, it surpassed your logic, your wisdom, and you just had to believe it, because this wasn't just written for them back then. This transcended time, these letters. This was speaking to you directly. Roll out fundamentalism.
Yeah, no, I get it. But the problem is it can't be both. I know that they tried to convince us that it was both. But if it didn't happen for these people, then it wasn't true for them. And that those words which these biblical writers wrote were just not true. And I hear what you're saying, Brian. I understand that you're showing the way that we used to think and sort of do the gymnastics to get out of it. But I just want to keep bringing us back to going, hold on, it can't both be true.
We can evangelize each other through this episode.
We can.
And that is totally cool.
So let's look at the good old Apostle Paul and what he wrote to the church at Corinth. The rulers of this age are passing away. Okay, and the today's English version says will not last much longer. Do not go on passing judgment before the time meaning final judgment, but wait until the Lord comes, who will bring both to light the things hidden in the darkness and disclose the motives of men's heart. The time has been shortened so that from now on, both those who have wives should be as though they had none. Right? So in other words, the time is short. Married Christians, stop acting like you're married. Get out there and do the sort of the end of the world kind of stuff. And those who weep should not weep, and those who rejoice as if they do not rejoice, and those who buy. Basically, what he's saying there is the time is so short, you've got to stop acting like this world is going to carry on, and you've got to start acting like that this is the end times, right? And he says, those that are in a state of holy celibacy, the elect remain pure while awaiting for the soon return of Christ, yada, yada, yada. And he goes on and on. This is 1 Corinthians 2, 4, 7, etc. And he says, Paul did not say, proclaim the Lord's death until the day you die. What he said was, proclaim the Lord's death until you're made perfect, until, and as if it's about to happen for them. And then to the letter at Thessalonica. How do we used to say? Because you say Thessalonian, so Thessalonica.
Thessalonica, I'm pretty sure it is.
Thessalonica. Well, there you go. I used to be able to say these words 25 years ago. I've forgotten a lot of them, which is kind of funny. But anyway.
That's right. I don't think you've forgotten. I think the Spirit doesn't dwell within you anymore and you cannot pronounce them.
Yeah, and I can't speak any sort of ancient languages anymore. Yes. So he says this to Thessalonica. He says, have you turned to God from idols to wait for his Son from heaven, awaiting eagerly the revelation, that is the revealing of Jesus? And then in Hebrews 9:28, it says, Christ shall appear a second time to those who eagerly await him. And these instructions to eagerly wait for Christ's return reveal how imminent the second of coming of Jesus was. For the coming of our Lord Jesus with all of his saints. For this we say to you by the word of the Lord, that we, meaning Paul and his mates, who are alive and remain alive, shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord near. So we, who are alive, shall be caught. So the people that he's writing to, including himself, he's saying, we're going to see this happen in our lifetime. Did it happen, Brian? Yes or no?
Well, you say you can't have both, but I've seen the little girl on the old El Paso commercial, and she says that we can have flat tacos and we can have curved tacos. Why not have both? I think that, again, you're using logic, and that's your greatest mistake here, Troy. Yeah,
well, it happens, doesn't it? If you start to use your brain, that's why you end up leaving church. Okay, let's talk a little bit more. Thessalonians again. For it is just for God to repay with affliction those who will afflict you, and to give relief to those who are afflicted, and to us as well, when the Lord Jesus shall be revealed from heaven with his mighty angels in flaming fire, dealing our retribution. Those will pay the penalty when he comes, etc. So in other words, here in 2 Thessalonians, he's giving comfort to these people, saying, you're going to see this. You're actually going to see this. And then, look, there's just so many examples, basically, is what the point I'm making here, where they were just saying, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. And I think the more that we go and inspect these verses, try to look at it through the eyes of the people to whom it was written to, and it becomes very, very clear. And I think, Brian, that it makes this point. This is why Christians believe that Jesus is coming within their lifetime. Because when they read the Bible, the imminence of Jesus' return is very, very clearly preached and taught, that it's about to happen, right? And so because they read this book, not as written to a group of people 2,000 years ago, but written to them now, they see it. And I heard Bart Ehrman say this. He said, the problem with fundamentalists is, he said, they're not fundamentalist about Jesus and his disciples believing that it was going to happen in their lifetime. They're fundamentalist about believing it's going to happen in our own lifetime. And in that, they're not teaching the same thing as Jesus at all, because Jesus was teaching the imminence and his disciples were teaching the imminence 2,000 years ago, not today.
But it really buys into that stuff. I mean, cast your mind back when we went to great big AOG. Everyone in the world who is a Christian is basically being persecuted. They're facing some sort of martyrdom. And they would certainly, at the Bethel-inspired stuff that we sat in that service, they were in a spiritual war. They were under attack. And to see this, what Jesus is going to come back with his angels and striking retribution and striking down those who oppress you, they have to transfer it to now, because it's just like, well, why would we be going through this if there wasn't some truth? And I completely understand what you're saying. Logically, this is speaking to people 2,000 years ago, but they have to believe this, because that's how they perpetuate those teachings. That's how that they get people to hang on to the hope of what's coming. And even though they make up this oppression, but particularly in a country like Australia or the US or wherever, there's no fucking oppression or martyrdom. We're living in some of the wealthiest times. Even if you're in abject poverty, you're nothing like the third world. But however, you're oppressed for your beliefs. It's just absolute load of crap.
Yeah, agreed. So look, there's a whole lot of verses there, and I do encourage you to get into this article. But let's talk about the point that we're making now, which is, how do Christian contemporary evangelists and scholars interpret the last hour as 2,000 years ago being today, right? And maybe basically we could ask them, but we know what they're going to say. They're going to say, oh yeah, it's now and not yet, and all that sort of stuff that you were talking about a moment ago. But 2 Peter, people at the time of the writing of 2 Peter were already starting to go, like we are now 2,000 years ago, and these people are only hundreds of years after it, going, what about the return of Jesus? Where is it? What's going on? And we read that in 2 Peter 5:1, it says, the glory that is soon, there's that word mellow again, to be revealed. He, Jesus, was foreknown before the foundation of the world, but has appeared at these last times for the last days. The end of all things is at hand. But here's that one that you were talking about before, Brian, and it's 2 Peter 3:8, where it says, with the Lord, one day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as one day. In other words, God's got his own timing. I just think it's quite obvious that it was such an issue for them back in the day that they actually had to deal with it. They actually had to deal with this issue. And so we read this as if it was written at the same time as Jesus' statements or these earlier statements of Paul or whatever. This was written a long time afterwards, right? It's like you and I, 25 years after leaving church or whatever, or 30 years after joining church. That's this kind of time frame when people like us in the early church are going, come on, you said this was right on the verge. You said this is that mellow, idea about to happen. So a day is 1,000 years, 1,000 years is a day. And that brings me back to that point, Brian, that I made before. If that's the case, then what point is there as ants speaking to Einstein? There's no point for him to come to us and make promises and they go, oh, by the way, soon doesn't really mean soon. A day is 1,000 years? For God's sake. So what's all this talk about soon? And I just think, Brian, for me, when I read this as a person that was deconstructing their faith, I read it and just went, you can't have both.
No, but if you don't have this, then what starts unraveling? It's that loose thread that you pull on. And it's a loose thread that many people pull on, and then it is the start of a long, sometimes shorter journey of deconstruction and eventually leaving, because it does make everything come undone. And that's the problem with it. And that's why the system must keep reinforcing and it must keep coming up with these explanations. It doesn't matter about sense making. Like, this isn't about making sense at all. This is about keeping people basically baffled with bullshit.
Now, I can hear Christians saying, some kind of Christians, the ones that are maybe, a little bit more liberal, maybe not a whole lot more, but a little bit more liberal, and they might turn around and say, okay, so the apostles got it wrong, but they were human. And we read often in the Bible where people like Peter and others, they got things wrong all the time. So no big deal. In their humanity, they got this wrong. So for me, the next question is, what about Jesus? What did Jesus actually say? What did Jesus actually think? What did he teach? Why do we believe this is what he taught? And a lot of that can be dug up through scholarship. But let's just skip back in time. Let's from where we're reading now, and let's go back to John the Baptist, even before Jesus. All right, just to put it into context of this sort of they weren't called millennialists, they were called apocalypticists, right? Which they were preaching the end of the world. And so John the Baptist in Matthew 3:2 says, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is 2,000 years away." No, he says the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Now the axe is laid to the root of the trees. Therefore, every tree that does not bring forth fruit is hewn and cast down into the fire, says John the Baptist, right? So this is about to happen. Who warned you, Pharisees, to flee from the wrath which is about to come? And there's that word mellow again, right? So John the Baptist believed this. Now, Jesus, who some believe may have actually been an initial disciple of John the Baptist, he tends to pick up where John the Baptist left off. And he says, "I have come to cast fire on the earth, and how I wish it were already kindled." Right? He says this in Luke. He says, "Do you suppose that I came to grant peace on the earth? I tell you no, but rather division. From now on, 5 members of one household will be divided against 3, against 2. Sounds like your family. They will be divided father against son, and son against father, mother against daughter, daughter against mother, etc., etc." Notice that Jesus, according to the above verses, is speaking of inaugurating this tribulation, of inaugurating this end time. When they persecute you, he says in Matthew, and remember, he's speaking to the first century disciples, in one town, flee to the next. For truly I say to you, you will not have gone through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. Now, he's not talking about his first coming there because he's there with them. So he's saying you're not even going to get through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. Now, was Jesus talking about himself as the Son of Man, or was it the idea that the Son of Man was another being? Doesn't matter. The point is the end is coming before you're even going to get through all the towns of Israel. Did that happen? Nope. So Jesus is wrong.
You might say no. So many would say yes. But yeah, look, the evidence is strong that it was completely, I mean, if you strip this back, strip it out of the fundamentalist space, which of course we have to firmly place it within that place, given the name of our podcast. If you take it out of that space, it doesn't make sense. A lot of it just doesn't make sense. There's no evidence for anything outside. I mean, this is the thing about the Bible. It's the evidence to reinforce its own words are within its own words.
Oh, that's right. You use the Bible to interpret the Bible.
That's right. There's nothing objective that you can overlay here, which is, it's a critical part of evidencing something. And so we have all these apologists who start talking about evidence. But again, the evidence goes back to what the Bible says, or they use some.
Yeah, it's like that meme of the plug plugged into its own power board. The end plug plugged into the power board. It's like it's circular reasoning based on itself.
And this is really coming out now, I think, as we get deeper into this.
So this is the one that for me was the straw that broke the camel's back. These verses I'm about to read. But I need to say, I didn't just read it and go, oh, okay, that's it. I actually dug really deep, and we can talk about that in a minute. But other verses in Matthew, right? For the Son of Man is about to come, there's that word mellow, in the glory of his Father with his angels, and will recompense every man according to his deeds. Truly I say to you, some of you who are standing here shall not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Matthew 16. in Mark, for whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be, I'm triggering reading these, I've got to say, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. And he was saying to them, truly I say to you, there are some of those who are standing here who will not taste death until they see the kingdom of God after it has come with power. So there it is in Matthew, there it is in Mark. Okay? And when I read those, Brian, I was like, okay, so what the hell does that mean? The kingdom come in power. Now, the first thing that I came across was people saying, well, that means the end of the world. And, you know, the fact that the angels are there and judgment and all that sort of talk, for me, that sounds a lot like, but I thought maybe I got this wrong. Maybe I misunderstood. And so I started putting it out to people, Christians, right? Both Christians I knew and Christians I didn't know. Started writing to people saying, well, what the hell is this talking about? And I had scholars, people that believed that they were scholars, just throwing confusing shit my way that didn't answer me, but just made it like you don't understand. But instead of spiritually saying it, it was academically, scholarly sort of language saying you just don't get it. But they weren't explaining to me what I didn't get. And I've told you before, maybe I didn't have a lot of, in air quotes, wisdom, but I did have some brains and it was not making sense to me, right? So the one that actually stuck with me was that it was talking about the transfiguration, that what Jesus was actually referring to was a transfiguration. And two, maybe three of those synoptic gospel, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, when they do this, actually do go on to talk very soon about the transfiguration. But the problem with the transfiguration is it doesn't match up to all the predictions of what this was going to look like when the Son of Man comes, which is what they were going to apparently see. And the second thing, and this is what Bart Ehrman said when I wrote that question to him, because that was something that sort of stuck with me, was did the writers mean the transfiguration to answer these verses? And the answer is probably they did, because they could see the contradiction themselves, right? Then they weren't morons. They were writing, quite intense, works. And so when they put that in there, does that actually answer what Jesus said? And Bart said, no, it doesn't, because he says, some standing here will not taste death, which means that some standing here will taste death. And who died before the transfiguration? None of them. Some of you standing here. So what he should have said was, all of you standing here will not taste death, right? But he didn't say that.
He was hedging his bets.
He was hedging his bets. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, because who knows? They could have tripped up and all this kind of stuff. So for me, this was it. For me, this was the linchpin, these verses here, because I had actually done a lot of digging into Mormonism, right? And I could open the Book of Mormon and show you the contradictions and show you the errors. And this is not true because of these things. And when people started showing this to me from the Bible, I was like, if I let this go, I have to let Mormonism go. I have to let the Book of Mormon go. And I'm sorry, this is a book that was written in the 1800s, and it's garbage. I'm not saying that, the Bible has no, you know what I mean when I say it's garbage. This is just not true. Okay? And so that was the first thing. And I don't believe that the transfiguration actually answers this. I think it was an attempt by the early church writers to try and explain what he meant, because by that stage it had all, not happened. But no. So the next thing that I heard from someone else was they said, and this was interesting, was they said, I think it was preterism, and it was the idea, no, he did come back, but he came back invisibly. And there's going to be multiple returns of Jesus. And when I heard that, the first thing that came to my mind was, hold on, that's what Jehovah's Witnesses said about 1918. They said, yeah, he did come back. He came back invisibly. Shh, don't tell anyone. And it's like, we used to laugh at them for that. Oh, okay. So you go around telling everyone Jesus is coming back. Then when he doesn't come back, you say he came back invisibly. Turns out they didn't make that up. Christians made that up, like, what we would call Orthodox Christians made that idea up ages ago. And so this is what people would legitimately, Bible-believing Christians were saying, yes, he did come back, but he came back invisibly. And I was like, hold on, this is just shite. So the more I wrote to pastors, I wrote to academics, I wrote to both sides of the fence, I really did. Nobody could come back to me and give me an adequate answer as to why some standing here will not taste death meant or did not mean that some standing here will not taste death. Yeah. And so that was it for me, Brian. I actually looked at it and went, I don't believe this anymore. And it was like a thump to my chest. It really was.
So what would you say the period of time was that took? Was it like a matter of weeks, or was it something
months.
just
No, it was months.
Yeah.
I did not read this and go, that's that. I was like, what if I've got this wrong? I don't want to go to hell. I don't want to be deceived. And so I really, really did, put in so much time and so much effort. People came back to me, some people who claim to be academics, going, oh, you just don't understand apocalyptic literature. That's what this is. As if they were saying it's hyperbole. And it's actually talking about the fall of Jerusalem and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, okay, but why are they not tasting death? And what about the angels and all this kind of stuff? And as soon as you start saying it's hyperbole, right, it's just extreme language, then what else in the Bible? They're just making excuses to, like you say, doing these mental gymnastics and academic gymnastics to make it twist and turn so they can hold on to their faith. But I mean, look, everyone does that. That's why some churches, it says women don't speak and wear head coverings, and they're not doing it. They make up reasons why they can get around it. And that's what this was I think, for a lot of people.
That was one of the biggest things that added enormous confusion to me, because I just didn't understand it, and then put it in a box of going, okay, I just don't understand it yet, and maybe I will one day, was the whole now but not yet.
The problem was you.
Yeah, it was.
But the problem was you. That's what they say.
Absolutely.
Like, you don't get it yet, but there is an answer out there. You just don't get it.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. So you've got to do a couple of things. You've got to either put it in a box and sit it over there until you have some sort of revelation about it, or you find the knowledge, or in your spirit, whatever, or you've got to abandon it. And I think at first I put the now but not yet stuff over in a box and went, I just don't get it. And the person I think that introduced it to me really strongly was at Bible college with Rick Watts. And I really respected Rick. And I was like, well, this guy knows what he's talking about. He's smart. And he's also real. And I really appreciated the way that he presented some things. But when it came to the now but not yet, I went, I don't get it. I don't get it, because it doesn't appear to be saying this on the surface. So why are we creating something? And I think there's this myth that gets created. And as you said, back at, probably the year 100, by then, Jesus hadn't come back. How do we actually grow the church? Well, we've got to find a way to explain why he hasn't come back. Or even, in the year 300, when it's all been canonized, it's there and it's all put together in a book. And this is how and then this constant explanation about the way that this should be read and should be heard and seen. And it's just the myth builds. But do you think that myth has changed in the last?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Totally. No, not even just in the last X amount of years. I think as movements mature, they start to move away from the imminence of the return of Christ, because, they've watched their grandfathers say it and die, and then their fathers say it and die, and their grandmothers and mothers, etc. But this has happened right throughout the church and right throughout church history. And that's why when I was in the Revival Center, which was that extreme Pentecostal group, they were very big on the return of Christ. And, they would speak to, we would speak to Anglicans and Lutherans and, why aren't you preaching the return of Christ? It's so clearly in the Bible. And that's because as a movement that, they were thousands of years old or hundreds of years old or whatever. And they were basically, they'd realized this a long time ago and sort of pushed it under the carpet. They can't preach it anymore because it's codswallop.
But if you look back in the 90s, which was basically our probably most present era for you and I, where we were really, really deeply into this, the end times and the coming of Jesus was spoken about a lot. Like I remember so many services on it, talking about just look around us, look at the evil of the world, look at all these signs that are coming out now, and you can actually peg where we are in time, and we're going to see Jesus soon. When we went to Bethel, I'm going to call it Bethel because Great Big AOG was essentially Bethel, they moved away from that, and they were like, a lot of the subtext of that service was, it's probably not going to happen anytime soon, and there's a lot of stuff that's got to happen before we can actually see Jesus' return and the fulfillment of Scripture. So I think there has been a bit of a moving away from it more recently as well.
Yeah, because they are as a group, they are as a movement maturing. That's what it is.
Definitely. But in the same way, and again, this is the cognitive dissonance again, is you'll see people like, the Bethel leaders, Bill Johnson, you'll see Sean Foyt out there as well, talking about all the signs of why you must support Donald Trump, because we're seeing an ushering in of the end times, and this guy is essentially our saviour. And I think they see him as someone who's going to fast forward some of these signs of the end times. And I think that they actually see him as a key in Jesus being revealed.
Yeah, well, I had a friend of mine who was a missionary, my friend Paul, and I read an article by him sort of in the last sort of, I don't know, maybe 10 years or so. I was sort of, cyber stalking him. And there was a verse that said, where Jesus says, that maybe it's not Jesus, but anyway, but talks about the gospel will be preached to the entire world and then the end will come. And a lot of missionaries believe that by taking the gospel to all the people groups of the world, the end will come. Right? And so they are hastening, there's some biblical language, they are hastening the return of Jesus, speeding it up by preaching to all these, tribal groups and all that kind of stuff. And so that's why they'll go in and introduce all kinds of viruses and bugs and everything to these people, and, whole tribes will get wiped out. But we can't not go, because Jesus can't return unless we preach the gospel to everyone. And yet, at the time of the writing, the entire world, according to Paul, was just the Roman Empire, or thereabouts. It wasn't, South America. They didn't even know that this existed. So they actually believed that they'd already done that, or that it was about to happen, Again, that's what they meant by the end of the world. But you're right, Brian, this hastening, this, speeding it up. And I saw one, a meme, and it was actually a billboard that someone had put out. And that verse, for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be called, listen to it, it's rolling off my tongue, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God. And that's an Old Testament, and they're saying that speaks about Jesus. But it actually said, the billboard said, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and then had a picture of Donald Trump. And so they were saying that messianic, or Christian messianic verse was actually speaking about Donald Trump, not about Jesus. That's just insane.
Oh, it's nuts. And you see a lot of that grandstanding with Trump. And Trump, absolutely. I mean, in some of his recent speeches, he's been saying that, God has saved him for such a time by the failed assassination attempt and all that. So really digging into that stuff with Christians and going, oh, fuck, we better vote for him because obviously God has saved him. But that rhetoric was even 1994 when I went to Estonia on the missions trip, was communism had only fallen a few short years before that. And it was, well, communism is atheism. So we need to get in there, preach the truth. And we were talking about battlegrounds there in Estonia. And I remember talking to people while we were there, and the concern that Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons had already got a stronghold in Estonia, and they'd set up churches.
There's another word, stronghold.
Yeah, totally. Yes. Hello, Christianese. But it was very much, it was about that war of going, oh, we've got it. Here's another part of the world that's opened up and we can get into there. And I remember when places like Albania opened up, people in our church going into Albania and going, there's another one we can tick off the list. Done. Come, Jesus, come.
Yeah, exactly. I spoke about that to a friend of mine who's still a Christian, and he said, there's prescriptive verses, that is what we do to make things happen, and there's descriptive verses, meaning that's just what's going to happen. And he was saying to me that those verses about that the gospel has to be preached before Jesus is coming, that the gospel will be preached to all people and then the end will come. He said, oh, that's descriptive, not prescriptive. In other words, we can't hasten this. We can just watch it sort of unfold. But yeah, this is it, man. It's just all this sort of theological mental gymnastics. But for me, Brian, looking back at these verses, this was it. This was why I really went and did everything I could to reach out to and read and really did my due diligence. And I thought, if this was Mormonism, I would have given up on this endeavor of trying to, prove what the hell's going on with these verses. I would have given that up earlier. But because this is my own religion, at that stage it was, I really went to town on this. And still to this day, I haven't found any adequate explanation. And so I side with Bart Ehrman, who says that Jesus was a failed apocalyptic preacher who was predicting the end of the world, which was a common view of, not everyone had it, but a common view of Jesus's first century peers, that there was this apocalyptic belief. What's interesting is Judaism moved on from it. They realized this isn't happening. And as a religious movement, they went into their whole sort of, rabbinic stage and yada, yada, and moved on from apocalypticism. They will look back and say, around this time, Jews were apocalypticists. But we realized that wasn't the case and we moved on. But Christians, that was when their canon was solidified. It's when their Messiah appeared. And so it can't be disputed, and so they've carried it for the last 2,000 years, even though it's not true. And I think, when you think about Occam's razor or the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid, you can do all this mental gymnastics. But as soon as you realize or accept this is a human document written by people and it was flawed and wrong, there's no longer any tension. It's just another religion alongside Islam, alongside Judaism, alongside Buddhism, alongside, there's nothing special about this at all.
But I think what it does is just highlights people's need for something, because this is just one small part of Christianity that we're picking apart and we're saying it just doesn't make sense. Like it's absolute crap. However, it's the largest religion in the world. I mean, I think Islam is catching up. However, it's still the largest religion in the world, and this is one of the key tenets of Christianity.
Well, of some forms of Christianity, Brian.
Well, yes, of some forms, yeah.
Yeah, because, a lot of your traditionalist Catholics, yeah, it's there, but they don't really think about it. They don't really, harp on it. A lot of your, sort of more traditionalists, they don't carry on. It's more the fundamentalists that do. And as much as they're loud voices, they're not the only voices in Christianity. So, yeah, I agree with you that when you actually look at historical Christianity, yes, it's there. But I think a lot of people have sort of pushed it out of their minds, out of their religious minds. And that's why it doesn't bother them that he hasn't come back.
And I mean, if you look at fundamentalist Christianity, Pentecostalism, it is the fastest growing part of Christianity. Christianity as a whole, I think traditionally is dropping off, but fundamentalism and Pentecostalism is ramping up. So at the same time, are they carving off these things that are getting in the way to build their brand? And I think so, because even if you look at, again, when we were involved 30 years ago, 25 years ago, it was nothing to have somebody shouting out in tongues, someone else discerning it, bringing a word, and that could go on forever in a service. All those things aren't displayed publicly anymore because I think it
Well, they are in Bethel, but they're not in Hillsong.
Well, yeah, but we didn't see, we saw the words,
Yeah, we didn't see tongues, did we? We saw a lot of words.
Yeah, a lot of words. And
minty fresh, powder puff of heaven.
Yeah, all the good stuff. We did see that, but there's a lot less of it publicly, I think. The weirdness is definitely still there. And folks, as we've said, we will do a Hillsong episode. It'll probably be early 2025 now. This year is fast coming to an end. But we want to compare that and go, all right, what's Hillsong doing now? And by all accounts, I think they're pretty, on the face of things, they've got rid of those gifts of the Spirit, I think, being out there as well in services.
Publicly, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's right. And this end time stuff, right? Because it's an embarrassment, because it didn't happen. And they've been saying it for so long, you know. The revival centers were saying it in the 40s and 50s, and those guys are gone. They've died, right? Even just in that generation, you know. It's just not going to happen. Anyway, man, that's this topic, you know. And look, we've skimmed over this article. There's a whole lot out there. There's Bart's book, of course. I'll put the links to this article into the show notes so that people can get it and do their own digging. But we invite you into our Facebook group and, you know, to discuss this and debate this for sure, because I think it's to me, this was it. You know, to me, this was like, okay, the Bible's not true. Jesus got it wrong, right? Some people tried to say to me, oh yeah, but Jesus was fully human and fully divine, and he said this in his humanity, not in his divinity. Someone actually said that to me. That was one of the arguments they brought. And I was just like, dude, come on. What else did he say in his humanity then, right? What else? Anyway.
No, it was just this. It was just this that he said.
It was just this, that's right. It was just this. And maybe the one about the generation not passing away as well. Maybe that one, he said that as well.
Oh, look, there's that too. But, I mean, essentially anything that there's a problem with, that would have been in his humanity, which there's quite a lot. There is a problem.
All right, man. So there we go. And as you know, as Justin on our Facebook group said, Troy got a bit salty on this one. Yes, I did. I got a bit salty on this one because I just think this is shite.
Yes. Well, it is. And I mean, but we also want to be understanding to those who may be still wrestling with this. And I guess what we want to do is invite you, and this article will be in the show notes, invite you to just read this stuff and try and think a bit objectively and sit outside of that space that has indoctrinated you, but also be kind to yourself and go, I've been taught this stuff for a very long time, and this has made sense to me, even though it doesn't make sense. So be kind to yourself, because this is coming from people who believe that they spoke in another language and spoke in tongues. You know, I mean, this is the stuff that you trick yourself into believing and doing, and you think that that is true. So be kind to yourself, but also be true to yourself.
Yeah. It's what's called the outsider test of faith. Look at this as if you didn't believe it. Like I said, when I did it with Mormonism, I was much harsher than I was when it was my own. But can I also say, Brian, for those that are struggling with this, let the word be a lozenge to your soul. As you read. I don't know where that came from, but yeah, I was just in my head going, yeah, let the word sit as a lozenge to your soul.
I do remember that. I do remember. That's a word. Maybe I remember it. Maybe there's, I don't know. It's really convicted me though, and I'm going to let the word be a lozenge to my soul.
All right, mate. I'm going to my Chinese in-laws for lunch to eat, as I do every weekend, better than I will for the rest of the week. So that's what I'm going to go and do. What are you going to do?
I don't know, but it's a beautiful sunny day here, so I'm going to get out and about in it. So yeah, I don't know yet.
Okay.
I'll see what happens.
Okay, see you, people. Don't forget about our Facebook group. Come along and join the discussion. We'd love to have you. And Mr. McDowell, I'll see you in 2 weeks-ish.
Thank you, Mr. Waller. 14 nights. If you'd like to connect with the I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist podcast, then please see the links in our link tree in the show notes. We invite you to join our listener community on Facebook, and we're also on Instagram, X, and Reddit. Check out our merch on Redbubble. We've got t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, and all kinds of great Exvangelical stuff that you can wear proudly. All proceeds go to building and promoting the podcast. We want to give a huge shout out to our Patreon supporters. Subscribers get a range of benefits, including free merch, early access to episodes, access to our exclusive subscribers group, and monthly bonus content. Again, all proceeds of this go to the running and promotion cost of the podcast. A special thanks to Ava, who manages our social strategy, and also to Kerry and Bree, who manage our Facebook listener group, and also to Bree, who puts out our monthly newsletter on Substack. All of our episodes are transcribed by Leanne to increase accessibility. The show is produced and hosted by Brian McDowell and Troy Waller. The sound engineering for this episode was done by Jonathan O'Brien. I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist is available wherever you find your podcasts. Again, you can find all our links in our link tree in the show notes. Or why don't you pop across to our website at www.iwasateenagefundamentalist.com